Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin wrapping up 3 days of meetings in Moscow today. The pair reportedly discussing a plan to end the fighting in Ukraine, while the Biden administration continues to question calls for a ceasefire coming from China. Joining me now for more, former Deputy National Security Advisor KT McFarland. So nice to have you back on. Good morning.
Good morning. Great to be with you, too.
KT, just want to get your reaction to this trip so far and why the Biden administration is seemingly so against a ceasefire. Isn't that typically how peace deals work out? You start with a ceasefire?
Yeah, that's exactly how peace deals work out. Look, in the last 3 weeks, China has moved out exponentially quickly to declare the new Chinese global order. 3 weeks ago, they had the historic peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which China brokered. Washington didn't even know they were meeting to discuss it. And Xi Jinping has a week ago gave a speech talking about his global civilization initiative. So he says, look, all the countries in the world should live at peace, and what you do in your own borders is your own business. If you want your own culture, you want your own economy, nobody should be telling you how to live your lives. And that's in direct contravention of the U.S. State Department, which says you want to do business with America, you have to have our woke agenda. It's also in complete opposition to the last 20 years of the forever wars in the Middle East, where we tried to shove democracy down the throats of countries and people that didn't want it. And now that he's in Russia and floating the idea of the Beijing peace initiative, and it sounds like Putin's on board with it, or China's going to make sure Putin's on board with it. And then he's going to call Zelensky and say, look, if you want peace in the region, you got to rely on China, because if you're going to look to the United States, all they'll give you is another forever war. So I think he's going to look pretty attractive to Zelensky, that kind of an offer, because, the Ukrainians know that this is a war of attrition. There is no way they win a war of attrition against Russia, particularly a Russia that's backstopped by China.
Okay, so counter to this peace deal, this 12-point peace deal that President Xi has talked about, is Vladimir Putin needs weapons on the battlefield from China. Does that happen? Do you think they worked this out over the past 3 days and China will start sending lethal weapons to Russia?
Oh, I think China's probably already been sending some lethal weapons to China. But yeah, the deal is as follows. Russia has oil and natural gas. The West won't import it because of sanctions. No problem for Russia. They just sell it to China. They sell it to India. They sell it to Turkey. So their revenue stream is still quite strong. The Russian economy is actually pretty strong. What the Russians are running out of is weapons. And that's what they can get from China. So China is in this position of enormous leverage over the Russian president. Putin may not want to settle, may not want to go to a negotiating table, but China can push him there, saying, you want weapons, you want us to buy your oil and natural gas? Well, here's my demands. At the same time, the Chinese can go to Ukraine and basically offer, I think what they'll do is they'll offer the kind of deal that they've offered to the Saudis and Iran, saying, let us build out your 5G infrastructure. Right. And then you can have digital artificial intelligence running your entire digital economy. Everybody knows Ukraine is going to need about $1 trillion to rebuild after the fighting stops. And if China is the first country in there, then think about what that does to the globe and what that does to geopolitics. The Chinese president basically said what he wanted to do. He said it yesterday in Moscow. Yeah. He said, get ready for this. You're going to see a whole thing that we haven't seen in the world in 100 years. Well, what has been the last 100 years? The American century. China is ready to make its move. And meanwhile, what are we doing in Washington? Well, we're arguing over who's a woman.
Yeah, KT, let me jump in. Let me jump in. So, yeah. John Kirby, for whatever reason, the administration is running away from anything that has to do with a peace deal in Ukraine. John Kirby went so far as to say yesterday that what was happening between China and Russia was not an alliance. Take a listen.
I think you've seen over years now these two countries growing close together. Peter asked a question similar to that yesterday. I wouldn't go so far to call it an alliance. Yesterday I called it a marriage of convenience, because that's what I think it is. In President Putin and Russia, President Xi sees a counterweight to American influence and NATO influence, certainly on the continent and elsewhere around the world. In President Xi, President Putin sees a potential backer here.
KT, just final thought, about 20 seconds. Is this just all really embarrassing for the Biden administration?
well, it's tragic for the United States.
Yeah, good point. KT McFarland, thanks so much for being with us today, breaking that down. President Xi, by the way, inviting Vladimir Putin to Beijing. We'll see if that happens over the next few months. Good to see you, KT. Thanks.
Thank you.